thank you everyone for coming today. It's a pleasure to represent Garibaldi today and tell you about their effectively a very grassroots initial discovery of an entirely new nickel sulfide mineralized system in the Golden Triangle, the Eskay Rift area of northwest BC. Disclosure statement, and I want to start off by talking to the world of nickel. The supply of nickel comes from two principal sources, sulfide nickel and laterite nickel. Sulfide nickel is typically processed through a mill and smelter facility. The global supply typically around about 700 to 800 kilotons from that source in any 1 year. The laterite supplies come from either high-grade nickel laterite deposits in places like Indonesia, the Philippines, and New Caledonia, or else they come from lower-grade deposits, in which case the material is very much treated as a raw product and fed into the Chinese nickel pig iron industry. So if you look at the roughly 5-year breakout of production by source, you can see the significant component of high-quality sulfide nickel, which makes up that red component. The laterite, which is processed through a plant, is in the orange color, and the green color is the laterite that feeds into the nickel pig iron industry. So it's about a third of each. In terms of actual grades, the sulfide nickel grades are typically very wide, but there are some very, very high-grade resources. Maybe about 8 or 9% of the entire inventory of global nickel has a grade better than 2% nickel, and it also carries value-added copper and precious metals. If you look at the laterite component with better than 2% nickel, it's a tiny fraction. Globally, if you look at the distribution, there are very, very few nickel deposits on the planet and very few producers. The main sulfide nickel production comes from North America, where you have Sudbury, Voisey's Bay, Raglan, and Thompson as the principal camps. In Russia, you have Norilsk and Pechenga, which are the Norilsk nickel operations. And in Gansu province in central China, you have the Jinshuan deposit. This deposit here is about 500 million tons of mineralization from the point of initial mining. It is all contained in a tiny intrusion. The surface area of this intrusion, this body of rock, is about 1 square kilometer. So I'm not talking about a massive footprint of a basin here. I'm talking about an ore body that can occur in a very, very small intrusion. If you look at the intrusions at Norilsk, some of these intrusions have a cross-sectional area of less than half a square kilometer. They're tiny, tiny, tiny targets. Even in places like Thompson and at Voisey's Bay, the intrusions that contain the mineralization have a very, very small footprint. And so they're commensurately quite difficult to actually discover. So you can put the world's entire nickel system on a very simple histogram. You've got the massive ores from the Norilsk setting in Siberia, total contained metal production plus reserves at material better than 0.75% nickel grade is approaching 20 million tons of contained metal, of which the production is approaching half. If you go to Sudbury, which is the other major camp in Ontario, Canada, production really has significantly outstripped what is remaining in terms of reserves and resources with better than 0.75% nickel. So it's a camp that is approaching its maturity. It's a big step down then to the next system, which is Jinshuan, which still has a lot of material left to produce, but the nickel grades there are only about 1% nickel, and there's not very much in the way of value-added metals other than cobalt. As you pop down the list, the next big deposit is in Manitoba, Thompson. Again, that's reaching maturity, but there are still significant components of high-grade material for the future of that camp. And then you go down into the Yilgarn in Western Australia, South Yilgarn, Raglan. Voisey's Bay sits right down here. It's a relatively small system. A lot of that production at the moment has come out of the ovoid and will come out of the ovoid for the next 2 or 3 years. Sudbury is an example of one of these camps that's reaching maturity. If you look around the basin, and this is the Sudbury impact structure with all of the ore deposits scattered around the outer margin. These support an integrated mine mill smelter complex with refinery at Sudbury. These deposits, if you actually look at them right now, for example, Falconbridge, this giant deposit here with almost a million tons of nickel production, is closed down. Garson is at a depth of around about 5,000 to 6,000 feet. It's reaching maturity. Frood and Stoby, these together approaching 3 million tons of contained nickel production, they're closed. The Coppercliff mine complex is still in operation and probably will be for the next 30 years. Creighton is now being mined at a depth approaching 8,000 feet. That's like getting on past 2 kilometers in depth. It's a clear challenge. Some of the latest mine to be brought into production, Totten, is this small one here. Up in the North Range here, you can see Levack and Coleman. These deposits, again, are approaching maturity. Sudbury is effectively reaching the point where it's not going to be the major source of future nickel supply. These mines are challenged, and to put new mines like the Victor deposit into production involves costs for capital of approaching $2 billion. So they're very expensive and very deep operations. I'm going to be talking in a minute about Nickel Mountain, but the significance of Nickel Mountain rests in the very, very high nickel grades. This is a plot of nickel grade against cumulate contained nickel. So I've basically just added the metal up as the deposits become lower and lower in grade. So you actually see broadly the grade distribution of nickel. For the sulfides, you can actually see that better than about 1 million tons of contained nickel is very high grade, better than 3% nickel. And there's around about 10 million tons that's better than 2% nickel, which is roughly the point at which the laterites kick in. The importance of the sulfides is also, though, that you get not just the cobalt value added, but also copper and precious metals. So I want to talk to you now about Nickel Mountain and how that fits into this story. There are several geological features, and I have to talk about geology, please forgive me. Scientifically it's important, but technically it's important to these rocks. And one of the key points of the Nickel Mountain rocks is that they sit within one of these structurally controlled environments at the edge of the Escape Rift. These structures, I'm going to describe this in a little bit more detail later on, they provide pathways from the mantle to the surface for these magmas to be injected. And they also provide the sorts of environments that typically contain mineralized systems. At Nickel Mountain, there are massive and disseminated sulfides that are related to the Enel intrusion. There are multiple mineralizing events giving rise to different sulfides. There is an absolutely classic assemblage of sulfides that looks just like the sulfides you'd see out of Norilsk or out of Sudbury. But the point that's critical is that the style of mineralization here is exceptionally high grade, with value from nickel, copper, cobalt, silver, surprisingly, which isn't a common feature in nickel deposits, as well as platinum, palladium, and gold. The grades in these samples from the mineral zone are amongst the highest grades on the planet in terms of the types of sulfide, and the feed is also an exceptionally high quality of feed, with none of the deleterious elements that can impact smelter technology. Realizing this exploration potential is part of Garibaldi's 2018 program, where their effort is designed to build a resource there and to also look beneath the Enel and explore along strike, undertake a regional exploration project as well. So Enel is located in northwest BC. It's a mountainous area, but it's also one that's very well serviced. There is a highway that goes right the way down to Smithers, which is the nearest large town. The Garibaldi land position within the SK environment is quite large. It's just located here to the west of SK Creek mine and a little northwest of Brucejack. There is a high power line that almost goes to the doorstep, and the actual occurrence at the mineral zone at Nickel Mountain is located at the southern part of this block. So the location is very good, and it's in Canada and BC as well. The Gossan actually sits on top of a mountain, and this mountain sits right at the western edge of a major gravity feature. That's an area of very, very dense crust that actually is outlined by the volcanic rocks of the Escape Rift. And it's this environment, this broad rift structure, that's probably important in the localization of this intrusion and also in the development of mineralization. And so you can see here, this is the historic discovery of mineralization at Enel. The discovery was originally made in 1958 by two prospectors, Ed and Le Fries. The property was taken up in 1965 by Silver Standard with the drilling of 7 holes. And subsequent to that, Sumitomo went in there, optioned the property, and put in a short adit with the intention of trying to find the depth extent. And their holes actually missed the mineral system because they were drilled too far to the west. After that, there was some ground and EM studies up to around 1990, but nothing really happened until Garibaldi acquired the property in 2016. And the first thing they did was to go in and have a look at the mineralization at surface. And they did some channel samples that came back with 12 meters of 1.6 nickel, 1.6 copper, and with higher grade intervals as well in between. And that was very much the first identification that this really was more than just a disseminated sulfide, that it had grade potential. In 2017, there was a helicopter-borne VTEM survey, and it identified conductive signatures. Those are the signatures of rocks that are typically sulfides, because sulfides are very good electrical conductors. That was over a 6-kilometer strike length. The initial drilling that was initiated in July and early August, by the end of the season, had produced 14 holes for a total of 3,500 meters of drilling. And that process resulted in the discovery zone, which is an entirely new mineral zone to the east of the original historic Enel, and with significant intercepts of 4.8 meters in the 4th hole, and then on the discovery zone, in the final hole that was drilled, EL14 was 16.7 meters of entirely massive sulfide. And then additional drilling in the northwest zone confirmed that this wasn't just a disseminated sulfide zone, it also had significant intervals of massive sulfides tied up in the system. The property is basically a mountainous area. The original Sumitomo adit is shown in here, and the Enel Discovery sits up on in the ridge here. This entire footprint of the intrusion is the area of immediate exploration activity, but right now the available drilling is just a few very, very short holes reaching around about 300 meters centered above Anomaly D. The other anomalies scattered through the property have still to be worked. They remain very, very important targets, and this year a lot more, I'm sure, is going to be learnt about them. I want to talk very briefly about the type of mineralization. The types of sulfides you see at Enel contain 3 minerals: pyrrhotite, which is basically an iron sulfide, which you throw into a tailings pond; pentlandite, which occurs as very nice grains. You separate those out with a mill, and that makes a very good nickel concentrate, especially if the pentlandite has a granular form. And then the yellow mineral here is chalcopyrite. These are the massive sulfides at surface. These are the disseminated sulfides at surface, and these samples predate the drill program. It was these rocks here at surface that have this very unusual texture. In some places it looks almost blotchy, in other places it's very variable in texture. When you see those sorts of rocks, you get excited as a geologist. They are indications of the chaotic processes that generate ore deposits. And in the case of these rocks here, the first analog that could be drawn is with some of the taxitic rocks that contain the mineralization at Norilsk. The geological plan and cross-section at the moment is still in early days with only 14 drill holes. You can see here the mapped extent of the intrusion is quite small. It's about 200 meters by 200 meters at the moment, but it may well extend further. That sort of footprint isn't unusual for nickel sulfide, significant nickel sulfide deposits like Norilsk and Talnek, where the intrusions are approximately on the same scale in terms of cross-section. We know from drilling it probably extends down as a pipe, and we know that there are now 2 zones identified, the northwest zone and the discovery zone, which comes to surface in a cliff section, but along this east-west section doesn't actually come to surface. The actual intrusion here is shown in purple. Hole number 14, which is this hole here, that one came back with massive sulfides grading 8.29 nickel, 4.24 copper, and there was 1.9 platinum, 4.5 palladium, and 11 grams of silver. The nickel concentration in the sulfide component of the rock is better than 8%, which is an extremely high quality of sulfide that will make a very, very good feed type. The types of rocks that contain this mineral system, as I've said, are very variable in texture. These examples here, A and B, are from Enel, where you can see this complete mess of different rock types. Here's an example from Norilsk, where you see exactly the same types of mess with the same sulfide associations. The massive sulfides define these very beautiful loop textures. Some of the pyrrhotite grains can be 2 or 3 inches across, separated by grains of pentlandite and domains of chalcopyrite. This again is at a depth of 137 meters, really, really shallow mineralization. The response of these intrusions to magnetic surveys is to produce quite a strong magnetic anomaly. And you can see on this map there are a lot of other magnetic anomalies which have not yet been explained. This one here, which connects up to Enel, which this is the actual surface expression of the intrusion, extends to the south on the side of the mountain here, covered by scree. There's another giant mag anomaly, another one over here. We still don't know what those magnetic anomalies are and whether or not they comprise part of a larger system of connected intrusions. The mineralization here in this polished sample consists of pyrrhotite, which is the barren sulfide, but you can see there's very beautiful examples of granular pentlandite. When pentlandite is granular, it's very easy to extract it during processing. If the nickel occurs in the pyrrhotite or as flames in the pyrrhotite, it's much harder to separate. So it's a very, very optimal style of sulfide mineralization. Looked at in the context of global sulfides, this is just a plot of weight percent nickel in samples that have more than 30% sulfur, in other words, massive sulfides. Here's a range of mineralization at Voisey's Bay, and you can see basically that the Enel style of sulfide starts for the northwest zone in the upper range of ovoid type mineralization, whereas the Discovery zone is significantly better. If you compare it with Norilsk and Talnak and with the deposits at Sudbury, the Discovery zone at Enel is far better. The northwest zone is comparable to the better styles of mineralization. So Enel is definitely, from the point of view of style of mineralization, one of the best styles in the planet. In terms of how it was formed, I like to think of this as a structural setting. I don't have a prop to show you in the way of a video, so I'm going to take my sheet of paper and I'm going to pretend this is a piece of the Earth's crust, and I'm going to make a fault structure through that crust. And as you see, I've just torn my sheet of paper in half to create 2 pieces that fit together, very much like the San Andreas Fault. If you take those 2 pieces of flat orientation, separate them out, you make a small space. It's those spaces that have actually acted as the pathway for the magmas to migrate from the mantle to the surface. Finding other spaces just like that with very small intrusions is the opportunity for the summer of 2018 program. So in summary, have a very high grade, high quality of mineralization. It's probably one of the youngest known nickel sulfide mineralized systems on the planet. It was active in the Jurassic, formed in the Jurassic. So there were presumably some dinosaurs out in Alberta who were quite shocked by the whole thing. There are chaotic, variable textured rocks that are very indicative of a prospective environment. Both massive and disseminated sulfides with classic associations that are typical of magmatic sulfides. And these massive sulfides occur at the margins of the complex and are intruded into the surrounding country rocks. So you don't just drill to the edge of your intrusion, you keep going to look for sheets of this material, and that's exactly what hole 14 found. That's exactly why Silver Standard and Sumitomo didn't find this mineralization. They drilled inside the intrusion rather than drilling in the country rocks around it. In the context of a global setting, these are really high-grade, massive sulfides, and they rank up there amongst the very, very best in global reserves and resources. For 2018, the outlook is to basically go in there, starting up drilling. I believe next month the rigs are going to be turning, and the idea would be to build a resource around the discovery at Enel. And the second side of this is actually to find the next one, keep on going. The opportunities for discovery are not just in the immediate near-surface environment surrounding the known mineral system, but they're also at depth underneath it. Garibaldi has a good position. As you're probably aware, about a couple of days ago, there was an announcement about another private placement. So it has about 23 million in terms of working capital to undertake this program, and it has no debt. The management team is very open to the scientific approach that has been taken to the exploration work at Enel. Steve Ragoji, the president and CEO, has guided this along with Barry. Everett McKellar is the exploration VP, and I work closely with him. We also have a team of experts, effectively people who've had experience of up to 30 years in the nickel industry, people like Alan King, who is working with the team on the geophysical aspects. So it's effectively a very good team of people. Thank you very much for your patience today. Thank you.